The first time Ethan saw her, he felt something was profoundly wrong. It was supposed to be just another long night at the diner, a place where tired truckers, lonely travelers, and sleepless souls passed through like shadows under flickering neon lights. Ethan had been working the graveyard shift for months now, ever since he left his old life behind in Chicago. He wasn't exactly running from anything, but he wasn't searching for anything either. Just existing. Just getting by. Then she walked in. At first glance, she seemed human. Almost. Her figure was slender, wrapped in an old brown coat 2 sizes too big, and her hands trembled as she pulled it tightly around herself. But it wasn't the coat that caught Ethan's attention. It was her skin, an unusual, almost luminous shade of blue, like moonlight reflected on water. No one else in the diner seemed to notice or care. The few regulars barely looked up from their coffee and half-eaten pie. The trucker at the counter kept his eyes on the news playing soundlessly on the TV. Even Marge, the cook, didn't flinch as she wiped down the grill. But Ethan knew something wasn't right. The woman hesitated at the entrance, scanning the room as if she was searching for someone. Or hiding from someone. Her eyes met Ethan's, and he felt a chill run down his spine. There was something desperate in her gaze, something pleading. He watched as she shuffled toward a booth in the far corner, keeping her head low. As he approached with a notepad in hand, she flinched slightly, as though she expected to be struck. "What can I get you?" Ethan asked, trying to sound casual. She hesitated before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just water, please." Ethan nodded but didn't move. Something about her felt off. She wasn't just another weary traveler passing through. There was fear in her eyes, barely concealed beneath exhaustion. He wanted to ask if she was okay, but he knew better. People carried secrets, and most of them didn't want to share. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that this woman wasn't just afraid, she was running from something. The woman who later introduced herself as Lyria barely touched her water. She sat in the booth for what felt like hours, eyes darting to the window every time a pair of headlights passed by. She seemed to shrink into herself, her thin fingers gripping the edge of the table as though bracing for impact. Ethan found himself watching her more than he should have. He wasn't usually the type to get involved in other people's business, but something about her felt different. Important, even. Finally, as the diner neared closing time, he gathered enough nerve to approach her again. "You okay?" he asked, leaning slightly against the booth. Lyria's hands clenched. She hesitated before answering, as if debating how much to say. Then, in a voice so soft it barely reached his ears, she said, "No." Ethan exhaled. "You need help?" Her eyes met his, wide and uncertain. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. But then, she whispered something that sent a shiver down his spine. "They are coming for me?" Before Ethan could respond, the bell above the diner's door chimed. 3 men stepped inside, their movements precise, their gazes scanning the room with cold calculation. Lyria's breath hitched. "It's them." Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He turned to Marge. "Close up early. Now." Marge raised an eyebrow but didn't question him. She knew better than to argue when he had that tone. Ethan turned back to Lyria. "Come with me. Now." For a moment, she hesitated, but then she grabbed his outstretched hand. And just like that, Ethan found himself running into the night, away from the quiet life he had built, and straight into a mystery far bigger than he could have ever imagined. The cold night air hit Ethan's face as he pulled Lyria out the back door of the diner. He barely had time to process what was happening, but instinct told him they needed to run. The men who had entered the diner were not ordinary customers. Something in their sharp, calculated movements set off every alarm in his body. "This way," he whispered, leading her down the alley beside the building. His truck was parked a few blocks away, and if they could just make it there without being seen. A voice called out behind them. "Where do you think you're going?" Lyria froze. Her grip on Ethan's hand tightened, her breathing shallow and uneven. Ethan turned slightly, just enough to see the shadowed figures at the alley's entrance. They moved deliberately, blocking the only way back to the main road. Ethan cursed under his breath. "Come on," he urged, pulling Lyria toward the other end of the alley. It opened up into an empty lot, a risky move, but they had no choice. He could feel her trembling beside him, but she kept up, matching his pace. Behind them, footsteps quickened. The men were following. They broke into a sprint. Ethan led her across the lot, dodging rusted-out cars and piles of discarded debris. His truck was just ahead, parked under a flickering streetlight. His fingers fumbled in his pocket for the keys, and just as they reached the vehicle, he unlocked the doors and shoved Lyria inside. He jumped in after her and started the engine. Headlights flared behind them. A black SUV screeched into the lot, blocking the main road. The men had backup. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. He slammed the truck into reverse, whipping the wheel hard. The tires skidded as the truck lurched backward, then he spun it around and floored the gas pedal. Gravel sprayed up behind them as they shot down the side street, the SUV in pursuit. "Who the hell are those guys?" Ethan demanded, glancing at Lyria. She clutched the dashboard, her knuckles turning pale. "They're hunters." Ethan swore. "Hunters? As in bounty hunters?" She nodded. "They've been tracking me for weeks. I thought I lost them," but her voice caught. "I was wrong." Ethan tightened his grip on the wheel. "Why are they after you?" Lyria hesitated, her breath unsteady. "Because I escaped." He shot her a quick glance. "Escaped from what?" She swallowed hard. "From the ones who bought me?" Ethan felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Bought her? What the hell did that mean? He wanted to press her for details, but the SUV was closing in. The street ahead was empty, save for a lone traffic light swaying in the wind. Red. No time to stop. "Hold on," Ethan warned. He ran the light. The truck jolted as it hit the intersection at full speed. The SUV followed, but barely missed getting clipped by a passing sedan. Ethan took the opportunity to make a sharp right, tires screeching as they barreled down a narrow road. Lyria clung to the seat, her breathing ragged. I didn't mean to get you involved." "Too late for that," Ethan muttered. He checked the mirror. The SUV had fallen back, but he knew they weren't giving up. "We need to ditch the truck." "They'll track it." Lyria nodded, understanding. "I know a place." Ethan hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Tell me where." And just like that, he was no longer just a diner worker looking to disappear into a quiet life. He was a fugitive, running from an unknown enemy, with a woman whose secrets were deep enough to drown them both. He had no idea what he had just gotten himself into, but there was no turning back now. Ethan gripped the wheel tightly, his knuckles white as he maneuvered the truck through the desolate back roads. The SUV's headlights had disappeared from the rear-view mirror, but he knew better than to relax. They weren't safe yet. Lyria sat beside him, silent, her blue skin faintly illuminated by the glow of the dashboard lights. She had barely moved since their escape, her hands still clenched in her lap. He could sense her fear, thick and suffocating, but he didn't press her for more information. Not yet. Where is this place? Ethan asked, keeping his voice steady. Lyria's eyes flickered toward him before turning back to the road ahead. There's an abandoned cabin deep in the forest, she said. No one goes there anymore. It's our best chance. Ethan nodded, adjusting course. He didn't ask how she knew about the cabin or why it was abandoned. Right now, all that mattered was getting somewhere safe. The roads became narrower as they approached the forest, the towering trees closing in around them. Moonlight barely penetrated through the thick canopy, casting eerie shadows across the path. The deeper they went, the more isolated Ethan felt. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lyria pointed to a barely visible trail veering off to the left. There, she said. Ethan hesitated for only a moment before steering the truck onto the dirt path. The vehicle rocked violently over the uneven ground, branches scraping against the sides like skeletal fingers. Then, through the trees, a small structure came into view, a forgotten relic of another time, swallowed by nature. Ethan killed the engine and exhaled slowly. This it? Lyria nodded. It's safe. For now. They climbed out of the truck, the silence of the forest pressing in around them. Ethan scanned their surroundings, every nerve on edge. There was no sign of pursuit, but that didn't mean they weren't being watched. Lyria moved toward the cabin, pushing the door open with a creak. Dust filled the air, the faint scent of decay lingering in the corners. It wasn't much, but it would do. Ethan followed her inside, closing the door behind them. We should rest, he said, though he doubted either of them would get much sleep. Lyria sat on the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. Thank you, she whispered. For helping me? Ethan studied her for a moment, then sighed. I don't know what I've gotten myself into, he admitted. But I'm not leaving you to face this alone. A faint smile touched Lyria's lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. They won't stop, she warned. Not until they have me. Ethan clenched his jaw. Then we'll make sure they don't. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the promise of danger. Their fight was far from over. Talia stood at the edge of the dense forest, the eerie glow of the twin moons casting long shadows over the ground. She had always feared the silence of the night, the way it clung to her skin like an unseen force, but tonight was different. The weight of her past, the haunting memories of her late husband, and the burden of raising her children alone all seemed to press against her at once. Inside the small, makeshift home she had built on Earth, her children slept soundly. Their soft breathing was a reminder of why she endured, why she had left behind the ruins of her once proud civilization to seek a new life among humans. But no matter how much she tried to escape, the past refused to let go. Tonight, however, was not just about memories. She had sensed something or someone watching her from the shadows. The same unease had followed her for days, an inexplicable tension that made her instincts flare up. She was no stranger to danger, but this was different. It was not a mere human threat. It was something more, familiar. As she took a cautious step forward, the leaves rustled, and a tall figure emerged from the darkness. The silhouette was unmistakably alien, yet eerily human-like. A deep blue hue covered his skin, and his silver eyes reflected the moonlight like liquid mercury. Talia, the figure spoke, his voice smooth yet filled with a quiet intensity. Her breath caught in her throat. She had not heard her name spoken in her native tongue for years. The sound of it sent shivers down her spine. Who are you? She demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure took another step forward. You already know. A rush of memories flooded her mind, memories of the war, of the exodus from her home planet, of the desperate attempts to find sanctuary. And among those memories, a face, a man she once trusted, a warrior who had fought beside her husband. Varen, she gasped. You're supposed to be dead, he interrupted with a wry smile. I nearly was. Her heart pounded as she took a defensive step back, her mind racing. If he was here, that meant others might be as well. Others who sought her, who wanted to bring her back or worse. Why have you come? She asked, her voice steadier now. To warn you, he said simply. They know you're here? The words sent a chill down her spine. Who? The elders, he replied. They've sent hunters. And they won't stop until they have you, or your children. Talia's stomach twisted in fear, but she masked it with a hardened expression. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to let them take away what she had built. I won't let them, she said defiantly. Varen studied her for a long moment before nodding. Then you must be ready. Because they are already on their way. Talia's mind raced with possibilities. She had spent years blending in, hiding in plain sight, trying to give her children a normal life. But normal was no longer an option. If the elders knew of her presence, it was only a matter of time before they made their move. And she refused to be caught unprepared. She turned back to her home, where her children slept, unaware of the looming danger. Her hands clenched into fists. She had promised herself that she would never run again. But protecting them meant making hard choices. Looking back at Varen, she asked, what do we do now? A slow, determined smile spread across his face. We fight. Talia barely slept that night. Every sound outside sent a jolt of adrenaline through her veins. The weight of Varen's words loomed over her like a storm cloud, filling her with dread and determination in equal measure. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cup of tea she had made but never drank. The first rays of dawn filtered through the window, casting a golden glow over her modest home. In the quiet, she listened to the rhythmic breathing of her children in the next room, their peaceful slumber a stark contrast to the turmoil inside her. Varen stood near the door, his stance rigid, as if ready for an attack at any moment. His silver eyes flickered toward her. You need to decide, Talia. Running isn't an option anymore. She exhaled slowly. I know. The reality was clear. She had spent years trying to hide, to blend in. But the past had caught up with her. The elders were coming, and they would not show mercy. Her children could not know the truth, not yet. She needed to prepare them, but how did one explain to a child that their entire life had been built on borrowed time? That their mother was not just a simple widow trying to survive, but a fugitive from a civilization that would see them as nothing more than loose ends to be eliminated? Talia's fingers tightened around the cup. How long do we have? Varen hesitated before answering. Days. Maybe less. A cold shiver ran down her spine. Then we have to move quickly. She stood abruptly, her mind racing through possibilities. We need weapons. Safe routes. A plan. Varen nodded approvingly. I can help with that. Talia glanced at her children's room, hesitation creeping into her voice. They're just kids, Varen. They're your children, he corrected gently. That means they are stronger than you think. She swallowed hard, pushing down the fear that threatened to consume her. There was no time for fear. Only action. The first step. The morning passed in a blur. Talia went about her routine as if nothing was amiss, but beneath the surface, every moment was calculated. She packed essentials in an old bag, ensuring food, medical supplies, and emergency credits were within reach. By midday, she knew they had to leave. But where? And how? Varen's presence was both a reassurance and a reminder of the urgency. He had survived the Elder's wrath once. He knew how to navigate the shadows. "There's a safe house," he finally said. "It's off the grid, but we have to move now." Talia nodded, her decision made. There was no turning back. She gently woke her children, masking the urgency with a warm smile. "We're going on a little trip," she told them. The youngest, Elin, rubbed her sleepy eyes. "Where are we going?" "Someplace safe," she reassured, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. They packed quickly. As they stepped outside, the morning sun shone brightly, deceptively peaceful. But Talia knew better. Something was coming. The hunter's trail. The journey to the safe house was not easy. They moved through back roads, avoiding main routes, always watching their surroundings. Talia's heart pounded each time a shadow shifted or a branch snapped underfoot. Varen led them through the forest, his every movement calculated, his senses attuned to dangers she could not see. As the day turned to dusk, they arrived at an abandoned cabin nestled deep in the woods. Varen scanned the perimeter before nodding. "We'll be safe here for now." Talia ushered the children inside, her nerves frayed but her resolve firm. Just as she closed the door, a faint sound echoed in the distance, a low, guttural growl that sent a chill down her spine. The hunt had begun. The silence in the cabin was suffocating. Talia sat near the small fireplace, her arms wrapped protectively around Elin, who had finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. Her son, Kale, sat against the wall, his sharp eyes fixed on Varen. The boy sensed something was wrong, even if he didn't yet understand the full gravity of their situation. Varen stood by the window, scanning the darkened woods with a tense expression. Every muscle in his body was coiled like a spring, ready to act at the slightest disturbance. The faint growl they had heard earlier still echoed in Talia's mind. It had not been an animal. It had been something else, something hunting them. "We can't stay here long," Varen murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Talia nodded. "How close are they?" Varen exhaled slowly. "Close enough. They are tracking us, but they are not attacking yet." A cold shiver ran down Talia's spine. "Why wait?" Varen turned to face her. "They want you alive. The children too." Talia tightened her grip on Elin. "I won't let them take us." The first signs of danger. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows against the wooden walls. Kale shifted uneasily. "Mom, what's really going on?" Talia hesitated. She had spent years protecting them from the truth, shielding them from the horrors of the world she had escaped. But the time for secrecy was over. She met her son's gaze. "We're in danger, Kale. There are people, bad people, who want to take us away." Kale frowned. "Because we're different." Talia hesitated but nodded. "Yes." The boy clenched his fists. "Then we fight." Pride and fear warred in Talia's heart. Kale was strong, but he was still just a child. Before she could answer, Varen's hand shot up, signaling for silence. A low, almost imperceptible vibration trembled through the floorboards. They were here. The attack begins. Without a word, Varen moved to the center of the room, drawing a sleek, metallic blade from beneath his coat. Talia gently set Elin down and reached for the concealed weapon she had hidden in the bag. Her heart pounded as she turned to her son. "Kale, take your sister and stay behind me." The boy nodded, gripping Elin's small hand. The cabin door rattled as if something massive had pressed against it. A low, inhuman hiss filled the air, followed by a sharp, metallic scraping sound. Varen muttered a curse. They sent a harbinger? Talia's blood ran cold. Harbingers were elite enforcers of the Elders, silent and efficient killers. If one was here, it meant their time was up. The door exploded inward, sending shards of wood flying through the air. A towering figure stepped inside, its elongated form covered in dark, armored plates. Its silver eyes glowed faintly as it surveyed the room. Talia fired first. The energy blast struck the Harbinger's chest, but the creature barely flinched. Varen moved in a blur, his blade slicing through the air, aiming for the joints between its armor. The Harbinger dodged with unnatural speed, retaliating with a vicious backhand that sent Varen crashing into the wall. Talia didn't hesitate. She grabbed Kale and Elin, shoving them toward the back door. "Run!" Kale hesitated for only a second before gripping his sister's hand and sprinting outside. Talia followed, her mind racing. The safe house had been compromised. They had to keep moving. Into the unknown. Varen reappeared beside her, his lip bleeding but his expression fierce. "They won't stop. We need to disappear." Talia cast one last look at the cabin. Smoke curled from the broken door. The Harbinger stood motionless inside, watching them, as if it knew they had nowhere left to run. But Talia refused to accept that. "We'll find a way," she whispered, gripping her children's hands tighter. The hunt was far from over. It had only just begun. The silence between Ethan and Sylvaris stretched like an abyss, each trapped in their own storm of thoughts. The night sky above shimmered with an eerie glow, a reminder that the universe was vast enough to keep secrets buried for lifetimes. Yet, the truth had begun to claw its way into the light, and there was no stopping it now. Ethan, his mind still reeling from the revelation about Sylvaris' past, sat on the worn-out couch in his dimly lit living room. His fingers absent-mindedly traced the edges of a coffee mug, long gone cold. Sylvaris stood near the window, her luminous blue skin reflecting the soft glow of the streetlights outside. Her gaze was fixed on the stars, her expression unreadable. "I don't know what to say," Ethan admitted, his voice rough with exhaustion. "There's nothing you need to say," Sylvara replied softly. "But I need you to understand." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "Understand what, exactly?" "That you've been hiding this from me all along? That your people are hunting you? That your children are—" He stopped himself before he could say something he might regret. "I don't even know what's real anymore." Sylvara turned to face him, stepping closer. "I never wanted to lie to you, Ethan. But I was afraid. My people, they don't take kindly to those who break our traditions. A widow is not meant to seek another partner. It's seen as a betrayal of our lost." Ethan scoffed. "That's insane. You deserve happiness too." Sylvara's eyes darkened. "Not in their eyes. And if they find me, they will take my children back to our home world, whether they want to go or not." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. "So what do we do?" Before she could answer, a soft chime echoed through the room. The security system Ethan had installed it himself was picking up movement outside. Sylvara tensed, her senses heightened. Ethan rushed to the window, peering through the blinds. 3 figures stood in the street, their outlines barely visible under the flickering streetlights. They were too still, too patient. They found me, Silvara whispered, her voice a mixture of fear and resignation. Ethan's heart pounded. Are they here to take you or worse? Silvara closed her eyes, as if reaching out beyond the walls of the house. When she opened them again, they gleamed with determination. We don't have time to find out. A sudden knock at the door made Ethan jump. The figures had moved, now standing directly in front of the house. A voice, smooth and cold, called out. Silvara. It's time to come home. Ethan instinctively stepped in front of her. She's not going anywhere. The voice chuckled. You misunderstand, human. This is not a request. The air in the room grew heavy. Silvara's breathing was sharp, controlled. She had prepared for this moment, yet now that it was here, she realized she wasn't ready to lose everything. Ethan grabbed her hand. We fight or we run. She squeezed his fingers. We survive. With that, the lights in the house flickered. A pulse of energy radiated from Silvara, knocking the door off its hinges and sending the figures outside stumbling backward. Ethan barely had time to react before she pulled him toward the back exit. They won't stop, she warned as they ran into the night. But neither will we. The moment they stepped into the cold night air, Ethan could feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down on them. Silvara's grip on his hand was firm, her entire body radiating urgency. Behind them, the front door of the house lay shattered, and the three figures were beginning to recover from the blast of energy that had knocked them back. They won't stay down for long, Silvara said, her breath quick and shallow. We need to move. Ethan nodded, his instincts screaming at him to get as far away from the house as possible. Where to? Silvara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. When she opened them again, a faint blue glow flickered in her irises. There's a place, not far from here. A safe house I set up long ago, in case I was ever found. Ethan didn't question her. He knew time was not on their side. Let's go. They took off running, their footsteps muffled against the damp pavement. The night was eerily silent, save for the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant hum of traffic. Ethan's mind raced through the events of the past few hours. It was only now settling in Silvara was not just an alien widow seeking a peaceful life. She was a fugitive, and the people after her were relentless. Behind them, the air crackled, a sharp burst of energy lighting up the street. Ethan turned his head just in time to see one of the pursuers raise a device, a sleek metallic rod that pulsed with an unnatural blue glow. They are using plasma trackers, Silvara hissed. They can follow our energy signatures. Ethan swore under his breath. Then how do we lose them? Silvara's eyes darted toward a narrow alley between two brick buildings. Without a word, she pulled him into the shadows, pressing him against the cool wall. Her breathing was steady, but her body trembled slightly, a sign of the exhaustion creeping in. They expect us to run in a straight path, she murmured. We have to misdirect them. Ethan understood. He had watched enough crime thrillers to know that doubling back, cutting through hidden paths, and avoiding open areas were key to losing a tail. But these weren't ordinary pursuers. They had technology beyond anything he understood. Silvara reached into the small pouch at her side and pulled out a tiny, translucent orb. She pressed it into Ethan's palm. Crush it. He hesitated. What will it do? It will mask our energy signatures temporarily. Trusting her, Ethan squeezed the orb. A soft, tingling sensation spread up his arm before dissipating completely. Silvara did the same with another orb, and within seconds, the humming of the plasma trackers grew distant, confused. "They've lost our trail," she whispered. "But it won't last long." They slipped through the alley, emerging onto an empty side street. Silvara took the lead, guiding Ethan toward a more secluded area of town. The buildings became more run down, abandoned warehouses and crumbling storefronts replacing the suburban houses. Finally, she stopped in front of a rusted metal door. With a quick press of her palm against the surface, a faint blue light pulsed beneath her touch, and the door creaked open. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old metal. The space was sparse, with only a few supplies scattered around: a cot, a set of clothes, and what looked like an emergency food stash. "This is it?" Ethan asked, catching his breath. "It's not much, but it will keep us hidden for now," Silvara said, locking the door behind them. Ethan leaned against the wall, running a hand through his damp hair. "Who exactly are they?" Silvara's expression darkened. "They are enforcers. My people's version of bounty hunters, sent to retrieve those who break the laws of our kind. And she hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am their highest priority target." Ethan frowned. "Because you left?" "Because I broke the most sacred law," she admitted. "A widow must never seek love again. It is seen as a betrayal of the bond we shared with our lost." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's archaic. To them, it is absolute." A heavy silence filled the room. Ethan's mind spun with possibilities, but only one thing was clear: running wasn't enough. Sooner or later, they would have to fight back. Silvara seemed to sense his thoughts. She stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "Ethan, I won't force you to stay in this. If you leave now, they won't chase you. You can still walk away." He met her gaze, unwavering. "I'm not going anywhere." A flicker of something relief, gratitude passed through her eyes. "Then we'll need a plan." Outside, the night stretched on, and the enforcers prowled the streets, searching for the one who had defied them. The air inside the bunker was thick with tension, an invisible weight pressing against Ethan's chest as he paced the confined space. Silvara sat on the cold metal bench, her sapphire skin shimmering under the dim lights. Her usually calm demeanor was strained, her golden eyes filled with something Ethan had rarely seen before: uncertainty. "We don't have much time," Ethan said, his voice a hushed urgency. "The council has made their decision." Silvara inhaled deeply, her fingers clutching the edges of her dress. "And what is it?" Ethan hesitated. He had rehearsed this moment in his head 1,000 times, but now that it had arrived, words felt insufficient. "They want you gone," he finally admitted. "Not just from this place, but from Earth." Silvara's breath hitched. She closed her eyes briefly, composing herself before speaking. "I see." Ethan clenched his fists. "It's not right. You've done nothing wrong." "They are afraid," she replied. "Fear makes people do irrational things." Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "I won't let them take you." A small, sad smile touched Silvara's lips. "You can't stop them, Ethan." "The hell I can't," he shot back. "There has to be a way. We just need—" A sudden pounding on the bunker door interrupted him. Both of them froze. Ethan grabbed the firearm strapped to his belt, his heart hammering. "Ethan, open up. We need to talk." It was Commander Reynolds, the man who had once vouched for Ethan when he had first taken Silvara under his protection. Now, his voice carried the tone of a man delivering an ultimatum. Ethan glanced at Silvara, whose expression remained impassive, though he knew her well enough to sense the turmoil beneath. She gave a small nod. He exhaled and unlocked the door. Reynolds stepped inside, flanked by two heavily armed officers. His face was unreadable, but his eyes flickered with something close to regret. "Ethan, we have orders." "Orders to do what?" Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. "To detain her until transport arrives. They are sending her back." Silvara stood, smoothing the fabric of her dress. "And if I refuse?" Reynolds looked at Ethan. "Then we are authorized to use force." Ethan's grip tightened around his weapon. "Like hell you are?" Reynolds sighed. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Silvara stepped forward, gently placing a hand on Ethan's arm. "We cannot fight them all, Ethan. I won't let them take you." His voice was a whisper now, almost pleading. She cupped his face, her fingers cool against his heated skin. "We must trust in a greater plan." He searched her gaze, desperate for another way. But deep down, he knew she was right. "Please," Reynolds said. "Come quietly. I don't want this to end badly." A heavy silence stretched between them before Silvara finally nodded. "I will go." Ethan felt something inside him crack. But before he could speak, she leaned in, her lips grazing his ear as she whispered, "Not all is lost." Reynolds stepped aside as Silvara allowed the officers to secure her wrists with glowing restraints. As they led her away, Ethan stood motionless, his mind racing. "Not all is lost." The words echoed in his skull, igniting something inside him. He clenched his fists. This wasn't over. As the door slammed shut behind them, Ethan turned toward the shadows, determination hardening in his eyes. He had one last move to make. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears as he watched Silvara disappear through the bunker doors. The cold metal walls seemed to close in around him, suffocating him with the weight of failure. But he couldn't let this be the end. Not when she had whispered those words, "Not all is lost." He had to act, and he had to do it now. Rushing to the control panel, he bypassed the standard security measures and activated the surveillance feeds. The cameras flickered to life, revealing Silvara being escorted down the dimly lit corridors of the underground facility, her sapphire skin glowing faintly under the harsh fluorescent lights. The sight of her restraint ignited a fire in his chest. Reynolds might have had his orders, but Ethan had something stronger: his conviction. He wasn't going to let fear dictate their fate. Flipping open the emergency comms channel, he keyed in a frequency only a select few knew about. A static hiss filled the air before a voice crackled through. "Ethan, what the hell is going on?" "Marcus," Ethan said, his voice low but urgent. "I need a transport, now." "You're out of your damn mind. The entire council is watching this operation. You defy them, you're done." Ethan glanced back at the monitor. The guards were approaching the final checkpoint before Silvara would be transferred to a high-security transport. If she got on that ship, she was gone. "I don't care about the council. I need you to trust me. Just get the ship ready." Marcus hesitated before letting out a sharp sigh. "I hope you know what you're doing." "I'll be there in 5. Ethan cut the comm and grabbed the pulse rifle from the weapons locker. His mind was razor-focused now. There was no room for doubt. Silvara kept her expression neutral as she was led down the corridor. She had foreseen this moment, yet it didn't dull the sharp ache in her chest. The Earthlings feared what they didn't understand, and though she had tried to prove her goodwill, their fear had won. A sudden flicker of movement in the security cameras caught her eye. It was brief, but she recognized the pattern. It was Ethan's signal. Hope flared inside her. As they neared the checkpoint, the guards stiffened, their hands hovering over their weapons. A shadow moved in the periphery, followed by the sharp crack of an electric discharge. One of the guards fell instantly, unconscious before he hit the ground. Chaos erupted. Ethan emerged from the shadows, his rifle raised. He fired a stun round at the second guard before they could react. Silvara wasted no time. She twisted her wrists, the restraints short-circuiting under the sudden energy shift in her palms. The glowing cuffs sparked and snapped apart. "Come on!" Ethan shouted, grabbing her hand. They sprinted down the hallway, alarms blaring behind them. The facility roared to life, security personnel pouring from doorways, weapons drawn. Ethan pulled Silvara behind cover and fired off suppression rounds, forcing the guards to take defensive positions. "Marcus, where the hell are you? Landing now. You've got 2 minutes, tops." Silvara turned to Ethan. "We won't make it through the front. We need another way." He cursed under his breath before his eyes flicked to a maintenance hatch above them. "Up there. It leads to the outer docking platform." They scrambled through the narrow passageway, their breaths ragged as the sirens wailed around them. The hatch opened to a rooftop overlooking the landing bay. Below, Marcus's ship hovered just above the ground, its cargo doors open, engines thrumming. But so were the soldiers. A dozen guards formed a barricade between them and freedom, rifles raised. "They are not going to let us leave," Ethan muttered. Silvara stepped forward, her golden eyes glowing with determination. "Then I give them no choice." She raised her hands, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, she fully unleashed her power. The air vibrated as an invisible force rippled outward, knocking the soldiers off their feet. Weapons clattered to the ground. The ship's hull groaned under the sheer weight of the energy coursing through the air. Ethan grabbed her wrist. "We have to go now." They sprinted toward the ship. Marcus yelled something, but Ethan barely heard him over the roar of the engines. He shoved Silvara inside before diving in himself. The moment they were aboard, Marcus hit the thrusters, and the ship lurched upward. Gunfire erupted from below, but it was too late. They were already ascending into the sky, breaking through the storm of hostility that had tried to trap them. Silvara exhaled, her hands shaking from the effort. Ethan slumped against the wall, catching his breath. "That was insane," Marcus said from the cockpit. "You just declared war on the Council." Ethan met Silvara's gaze, a slow smile forming. "No. We just won our freedom." She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Not all is lost." The ship soared higher, leaving behind the world that had rejected her. But ahead lay something new, something uncertain, yes, but filled with possibility. A future they would fight for together.